The hum of the engines filled the cabin of the business class section, a steady undertone of luxury and quiet power. Polished wood veneer tables gleamed under soft lighting. Crystal glasses clinked lightly as attendants poured wine worth more than most people's monthly salaries. Men and women in tailored suits scrolled through portfolios, adjusted watches that cost more than cars, and compared whose influence extended further across continents. It was a world designed to display wealth in silence, where unspoken status was measured by brands, mannerisms, and names carried like crowns. Into this curated space stepped Elena Gray, dressed not in designer silk, but in a plain blouse and worn jeans. She carried no leather briefcase, diamond-studded phone case, or aura of recognition. Instead, she had a small boy, 5 years old at most, with hair that curled softly at his temples, and eyes wide with the wonder of flying. His toy bear peeked from his backpack, its fur flattened from years of loyal companionship. Elena moved carefully down the aisle, one arm steady around her son, the other gripping a bag that had seen too many train stations and too few boutiques. The silence fractured almost immediately. Marcus Davenport, seated in the center row with his expensive shoes stretched arrogantly forward, let out a laugh sharp enough to draw eyes. The CEO, known for hostile takeovers and lavish press headlines, leaned back as though the scene unfolding before him was comedy tailored for his private entertainment. His voice cut through the hum of the engines. "We paid to fly business class, not to sit in a daycare." The words were not loud, yet rippled like oil across still water. Heads turned, smiles curved, some tight and polite, others openly amused. A man with a hedge fund reputation raised an eyebrow as if to say, "How dare the airline permit such an intrusion?" A socialite with diamonds crusted along her wrist chuckled softly and murmured something about standards slipping. Even the young tech executive, with his wireless earbuds removed, smirked. Elena's steps did not falter. She moved steadily, her gaze lowered, her son clinging to her shoulder. Her silence, however, provoked more than indifference. In this realm of money and recognition, silence was misread as weakness. Marcus was not finished. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming with a cruelty that delighted in performance. "Some mothers know their place," he said to no one and everyone, "and their place is certainly not among the leaders of industries." Laughter, brittle and shallow, fluttered across the cabin. Passengers shifted, whispering, passing judgment. One woman adjusted her scarf and hissed about crying children ruining the peace. A man muttered about how certain people should fly economy, where they belonged. These were the kind of comments designed to sting without being addressed directly. Daggers wrapped in silk. Elena adjusted Noah on her lap and found her seat. She slid the worn bag under the seat before her, buckled the boy in, and brushed his hair from his forehead. She said nothing. Her fingers moved with tenderness, steady, practiced. She whispered only a small reassurance to Noah, too soft for others to hear. Her silence was a statement, but the passengers did not see it. They mistook quiet for submission. They mistook composure for defeat. Across the aisle, Clara Reynolds, the senior flight attendant, observed. Years of service had taught her to recognize faces, to measure atmospheres, to anticipate when turbulence came not from skies, but from passengers themselves. Her eyes lingered on Elena longer than on others. Something in the way Elena's shoulders carried their weight, and her eyes flickered briefly, steady yet cautious, told Clara this woman was not what she seemed. Clara's professional smile never faltered, but inside she made a note. Marcus continued, his voice pitched to reach the ears of anyone not already listening. "Imagine," he said, "bringing a child into this environment and disrupting serious conversations with bedtime cries. Some people think motherhood earns them privilege, but truthfully, it earns them limits." The boy, Noah, looked up with innocence untainted by the venom around him. He smiled at his mother, clutching his toy bear, unaware of the ridicule swirling like smoke. His world was still small, still safe in the circle of her arms. A murmur passed through the cabin as more passengers joined the unspoken consensus that Elena Gray was an outsider. Business class was for contracts, negotiations, and networking, not for single mothers with tired luggage and second-hand clothes. Yet no one asked who she was. No one asked why she sat there, ticketed legitimately as they were. Assumptions were easier than curiosity. Elena reached into her bag, withdrawing a small blanket. She wrapped Noah carefully, her movements quiet, graceful, untouched by the disdain aimed at her. Her profile against the dim cabin light held a calmness that unsettled those who expected fluster or apology. The laughter dimmed momentarily, as if they sensed their words had failed to pierce her. Marcus, unwilling to surrender the stage, smirked and muttered again, loud enough to be heard. Silence can be an admission. She knows she does not belong. Elena's eyes lifted then, just briefly, to meet his. Her gaze was level, cool, unflinching. There was no anger, no shame, only something steady and unreadable. It was the kind of look that unsettled men used to dominance, because it offered no foothold for superiority. Marcus shifted, not much, but enough that Clara noticed. Then Elena lowered her eyes again, smoothing Noah's hair, as if Marcus had never spoken. The engines roared slightly louder as the aircraft climbed higher. Glasses clinked again, conversations resumed, but energy shifted beneath the surface. The passengers had cast their judgment, secured their hierarchy, and believed they understood the tableau. A mother traveling with her child in a place reserved for power. A woman out of place among the lions of industry. They did not realize yet that silence was not weakness, and composure was not defeat. Marcus settled back into his seat, convinced he had restored order, confident that his throne in this airborne kingdom remained secure. He did not see Clara still watching, nor did he consider the weight of his words against her stillness. He only saw what he wanted to see, a woman beneath his notice, a child irrelevant, a story closed. But stories do not close so easily. Far above the earth, wrapped in the sterile luxury of a business-class cabin, destinies sat side by side. The engines carried them toward a horizon none could yet glimpse. And in the silence of one woman's endurance, the seeds of revelation waited, patient, inevitable. Elena Gray, silent mother, anonymous to the world around her, had not spoken a word. But the sky had ways of uncovering truths, and before the journey ended, her silence would roar louder than Marcus Davenport's laughter ever could. The murmur of disdain spread like wildfire through the cabin, weaving between leather seats and whispered conversations, building an atmosphere heavier than the pressurized air itself. Elena had barely fastened Noah's belt before the chorus began again, this time more insidious, layered in tones that carried judgment disguised as casual commentary. A hedge fund manager in his 50s leaned toward his neighbor, lowering his voice enough to feign discretion, yet pitching it high enough for others to catch. "Standards are falling everywhere," he said, tapping a Mont Blanc pen against the armrest as though punctuating a decree. "What is the point of paying for exclusivity if the airline dilutes the experience with this?" The woman beside him, elegant in a dress the color of crushed wine, smiled knowingly and tilted her champagne flute. She did not need to add words. Her glance toward Elena and Noah was sharp enough to cut. The man across from them, a rising tech entrepreneur with his laptop open, smirked without lifting his eyes. The soft clicking of his keyboard became part of the ridicule, an unspoken suggestion that even distracted work was worth more than the presence of a quiet mother. Elena kept her hands steady. She unfolded a packet of crackers, slipping one into Noah's hand, her touch gentle, patient. The boy munched happily, crumbs catching at the corners of his mouth. His innocence was a shield against the poison around him, though he did not realize it. Elena brushed the crumbs away and whispered something soft, words only for him, never for the watching crowd. But silence, to those in this cabin, was not golden. It was an invitation. A younger man with an expensive watch adjusted his cuff and announced to no one in particular that traveling with children was inconsiderate. He told a story about how his firm closed deals worth billions in midair and how such negotiations required quiet, focus, and respect. How could focus survive in the presence of toys and bedtime tales? His voice dripped with self-satisfaction, like every syllable was a coin tossed into his fountain of pride. Laughter rose again, brittle and sharp, ricocheting off the cabin walls. Some passengers covered their smiles with their hands, pretending restraint. Others did not bother. The amusement was communal now, a social agreement that Elena Gray was an interloper in their sanctuary of affluence. Marcus watched it unfold like a conductor pleased with his orchestra. His smirk broadened, his voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to dominance. "This is what happens when airlines mistake status tickets," he declared. "Money alone does not define class. Clearly, not all who pay belong among us." The passengers nodded, murmured agreement, fed by his assurance. He was mocking Elena now, and weaving a philosophy of exclusion, a creed of superiority that others could adopt to reaffirm their fragile positions. Marcus positioned himself as high priest in this airborne temple of wealth, and they followed, eager to belong. Clara Reynolds moved quietly down the aisle, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her expression serene. Years of training taught her never to reveal judgment, yet her eyes betrayed a flicker of disapproval. She paused near Elena's seat, offering Noah a warm smile and asking if he wanted juice. Her kindness was a small rebellion, subtle yet deliberate, countering the cruelty around them. Elena met her gaze briefly, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, recognition, strength. Elena declined softly, shaking her head, and Clara moved on. But the moment lingered. Not everyone had joined the chorus. Still, the chorus swelled. A Pearl woman leaned toward her husband and muttered about choosing this flight to avoid disturbances. She wondered aloud whether the airline would compensate them for the decline in atmosphere. Her husband nodded solemnly, as if the very presence of a child were a breach of contract. The young tech executive finally spoke, pulling an earbud from his ear. He laughed under his breath and said he hoped the boy at least came with noise-canceling settings. Otherwise, the flight would be unbearable. The passengers around him chuckled. Even the hedge fund manager grinned, pleased by the clever cruelty. Elena remained unmoved. She wiped Noah's fingers with a napkin, folded it neatly, and tucked it away. Her movements were precise, controlled, never hurried. Her silence was a shield, and though the passengers saw only compliance, there was resolve beneath it. She had endured sharper words in harsher rooms. Marcus was not content with silence. He thrived on reaction. When Elena offered none, he leaned forward again, raising his voice just enough to pierce the cabin. He said some people mistake motherhood for nobility, but all it does is highlight limitations. True power requires sacrifice beyond diapers and bedtime stories. The words were meant to wound, but Elena did not flinch. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small book for Noah. She opened it on his tray table, guiding his finger along the pictures, whispering the story in his ear. The boy giggled quietly, oblivious to the sneers. That giggle cut through the ridicule like sunlight piercing storm clouds. For a moment, the laughter faltered. A few passengers glanced away uncomfortable with their cruelty and unwilling to admit it aloud. But Marcus noticed, and anger flickered behind his smile. He had not come this far in life to be undermined by a child's laugh. Clara returned, offering champagne to the passengers in the row across from Elena. She poured elegantly, yet her eyes flicked again toward the mother and child. She sensed tension rising, sensed a story unfolding deeper than appearances suggested. Elena's calm unsettled her, though she did not know why. The chorus continued, though softer now, like embers rather than flame. The passengers exchanged whispers about education, background, family names, measuring each other's worth compared to Elena's absence of a visible pedigree. In their world, stories were currency, and Elena had presented none. To them, her silence confirmed their suspicion that she had no story worth telling. But stories are never that simple. The engines droned on, steady and eternal, carrying them farther from the ground and deeper into a journey none understood yet. Noah leaned against his mother, eyelids heavy, the toy bear tucked under his arm. Elena adjusted the blanket, her eyes softening as she watched him drift toward sleep. At that moment, she looked untouchable, not because of wealth or status, but because of the quiet strength of love. Marcus leaned back, satisfied with his performance. He believed he had reasserted order, that the hierarchy of the cabin was restored, with him firmly at the top. He did not see the subtle shift in Clara's expression. He did not sense the discomfort among some, who laughed less freely now. He only saw what he wanted: a woman diminished, a child irrelevant, a victory secured. Yet the air held weight, a heaviness born not of altitude but of inevitability. The whispers of contempt, laughter, and smirks were threads weaving a tapestry destined to unravel. They had mistaken silence for surrender, but silence was only a prelude. In the stillness of Elena Gray's composure, something stirred unseen. It was not weakness nor shame, but patience, and patience has a way of outlasting mockery. By the time the engines steadied into their long-haul rhythm, and the lights dimmed to mimic night, the chorus of contempt had become exhausted. The passengers leaned back, smug in their conclusions, unaware that their judgments had written the opening lines of a story they could not control. For in the quiet heart of one mother's silence, truths far larger than their laughter were waiting to be revealed. And when the moment came, their contempt would be remembered not as power, but as folly. The cabin lights dimmed to a softer glow as the aircraft leveled into cruising altitude, the steady hum of the engines now a backdrop to murmured conversations and the occasional clink of glass. Passengers settled into the rhythm of the long flight. Screens flickered with movies, and the attendants moved with quiet efficiency down the aisle. Yet beneath the veneer of calm, Clara Reynolds carried with her the echo of the disdain that had filled the air only minutes earlier. Years in the sky had taught her to recognize patterns in people, the predictable rhythms of entitlement and arrogance. She had witnessed executives snapping fingers at attendants, celebrities treating crew like shadows, and wealthy passengers using words as weapons to maintain their illusion of superiority. But something about the sharp cruelty aimed at Elena Gray unsettled her. It was not just the ridicule itself, but the persistence. The way Marcus Davenport had orchestrated the disdain of others as if he were conducting an orchestra of mockery. Clara's training kept her expression serene, her posture impeccable. Yet inside, she felt a flicker of something unfamiliar on flights like these: defiance. She had spent too many years watching injustice play out silently at 30,000 feet, passengers hiding behind titles and fortunes. But Elena had not raised her voice, had not pleaded or protested. She had endured with a calm that carried weight, a silence more eloquent than any defense. That composure gnawed at Clara's curiosity. As she poured wine for a pair of socialites in the front row, her eyes wandered back to Elena. The woman sat quietly with Noah, holding the book open as the boy traced his finger along the pictures. His small lips moved as though repeating the story his mother whispered to him. Clara noticed the softness in Elena's movements, the steadiness of her hand, and the way her shoulders bore not just a child's weight, but something larger, something invisible yet immense. The passengers around her had returned to their distractions. The hedge fund manager was buried in a financial report, his pen scratching furiously as though the fate of economies depended on his notes. The tech entrepreneur was back on his laptop, his fingers dancing frantically. The pearl-draped woman reclined with an eye mask, her disdain set aside as she slipped toward shallow sleep. Marcus sat with a glass of scotch, savoring it like a conqueror after battle, a smirk still curling his lips as if victory belonged permanently to him. Clara noticed the contrast. Among the glitter of wealth and arrogance sat Elena in quiet stillness, her son a warm weight against her. She seemed untouched by the luxury or the hostility in her sphere, as though the contempt had dissolved before it could reach her. Clara found herself glancing repeatedly, her curiosity sharpening into something more. Who was this woman? And why did her silence feel less like surrender and more like a storm waiting for its hour? The flight carried on. Dinner service began, and silver trays with linen napkins moved gracefully from the galley to the passengers. Clara delivered dishes with flawless timing, attending to preferences with practiced ease. Yet as she bent to place a tray before Elena, she allowed her professional mask slightly to slip. Her eyes met Elena's, warm, questioning, searching for some acknowledgement of the ugliness she had witnessed earlier. Elena returned the look with a faint smile, barely there, but it spoke volumes. It said thank you without words. It said I am fine without reassurance. It said more than Clara could have expected from such a brief exchange. Clara hesitated a moment longer than protocol allowed before moving on, but the weight of that glance stayed with her. Noah tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing to the cutlery set before him, clearly more fascinated by the polished shine of the fork than by the carefully plated dish. Elena guided his hand, showing him how to hold it, her patience endless. She leaned close, whispering instructions, encouraging him with each attempt. Clara watched from the corner of her eye and felt something tug at her chest. It was a scene too intimate for such a cold environment, too tender for the cabin where power was measured in assets and arrogance. Marcus interrupted the fragile moment with another comment directed at the hedge fund manager, but pitched loud enough to fill the air. Imagine dragging a child through a world meant for professionals, he said. Imagine thinking bedtime stories hold weight in rooms where billions shift with a word. His voice dripped with contempt, his smirk daring Elena to respond. But Elena did not. She adjusted Noah's napkin, smiled at him as he successfully speared a piece of vegetable, and kissed the top of his head. Her silence was louder than Marcus's words, and though most passengers pretended not to notice, Clara saw the flicker in Marcus's eyes. It was the flicker of a man whose power did not land as sharply as he expected. Clara knew then that Elena's silence was not born of fear. It was born of something deeper, something unshakable. She thought of all the passengers she had served over the years, all the wealth, titles, and names that had sat in these very seats, and realized none of them carried themselves quite like this woman who looked so ordinary, so misplaced in her plain clothes. There was strength here, veiled but undeniable. As she moved back toward the galley, Clara paused to straighten a blanket for an older man in the corner. Yet her thoughts remained fixed on Elena. She could not name the feeling exactly, but it was as though she were watching a stage before the curtain truly rose. Something waited, something the rest of the cabin could not yet see. Dinner ended, lights dimmed further, and passengers settled into the night flight lull. Some dozed, others typed furiously on devices that glowed against their faces, chasing deadlines and victories. Marcus finished another drink, his arrogance thick as ever, though quieter now in the dark. Elena leaned back, Noah asleep against her chest, his small breaths even and peaceful. Clara lingered near the galley, her gaze shifting again toward the mother and child. She thought of how cruelly the world judged appearances, how quickly assumptions cemented into truths in the minds of the powerful. But she also thought of how fragile those judgments were, how easily they cracked when confronted with reality. She did not know Elena's truth yet, but she felt it, sensed it. And for the first time in years, Clara looked forward to what the flight still held. Because something told her that Elena Gray was not simply a mother enduring ridicule at 30,000 feet. She was a woman with a story strong enough to silence Marcus Davenport. The night deepened outside the windows, stars scattered like fragments of diamond across endless black. The engines roared steadily, carrying the plane across continents and oceans. And in the hush of the cabin, Clara Reynolds kept her watch, eyes never straying far from Elena, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be silence, but revelation. The air inside the business class cabin had grown heavier, though no one could explain why. Even before the announcement, an invisible tension had begun to coil through the rows of polished seats and hushed conversations. Evelyn sat upright now, her spine stiff, her fingers knotted together so tightly that her knuckles whitened. She had been silent for so long, refusing to bite at Charles's repeated mockery. But something in her posture suggested that silence was about to break. The pilot's voice pierced the cabin in a sharp, commanding tone that silenced every laugh and murmur. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reed speaking. We are requesting immediate cooperation from all passengers. A national emergency has been declared. All communication devices must be switched off at once. Military personnel on board are to make themselves known. His voice held the unmistakable edge of urgency, the kind of steel that only came in moments where hesitation meant disaster. Every passenger froze, eyes wide, breaths caught. A ripple of fear moved down the aisle like a cold wind. Military personnel? A national emergency? The words ignited dozens of whispered questions. And even the children, who had been playful distractions moments ago, now huddled quietly against their mothers. Charles blinked, his smug smile faltering for the first time since they had taken their seats. His hand shifted toward his phone, but Evelyn was quicker. Her voice rang out, low and clear, but carrying a weight that seemed to hush the entire row. No one touches their devices. Not a single one. The tone was not a request. It was a command that rolled off her tongue with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. All eyes turned to her, startled. The quiet mother with tired eyes and restless child, who had endured ridicule without much complaint, now sat with a suddenly immense presence. Charles laughed uneasily, trying to recover his bravado. "And who exactly are you to be barking orders? You've been a nobody for hours, and now you—" But Evelyn cut him off without even looking his way. She had already stood, steadying herself against the seat, her daughter's small fingers slipping reluctantly from her hand. Her face was unreadable, her eyes fixed firmly toward the front of the cabin, where the stewardess, pale and uncertain, was repeating the captain's instructions. "I am Major Evelyn Carter, Strategic Operations Command," she said, her voice even, but carrying through the cabin like the strike of a drum. "And every single life on this plane depends on immediate compliance." The silence that followed was absolute. It felt as if the entire aircraft held its breath. Charles's mouth dropped open. His words caught like stones in his throat. The stewardess nearly dropped the safety folder in her trembling hands. Passengers craned their necks, disbelief warring with awe. But Evelyn's presence left no room for doubt. From the rear, a man in civilian clothes stood slowly, pulling a leather case from beneath his seat. He was older, with a face worn by years of service and discipline. His voice rang out firmly. "Colonel Grant, Air Defense Command." He saluted Evelyn with crisp precision, his respect immediate. That was all it took. A chain reaction of movement followed as 3 more passengers rose, 2 men and 1 woman, each revealing themselves as military officers traveling incognito. Their identities confirmed Evelyn's words, their deference confirming her authority. In an instant, the quiet mother became the center of gravity around which the entire cabin now revolved. The pilot's voice crackled again. "Major Carter, we request your immediate presence in the cockpit for a time-sensitive briefing." Evelyn nodded once, not wasting a second. She turned to her daughter, kneeling to meet her eyes. "Stay here, sweetheart. I'll be back soon." "Listen to the lovely lady," she gestured toward the stewardess, who seemed both honored and terrified to be entrusted with the child. Her daughter nodded bravely, though her small hands trembled as she clutched the stuffed bear Evelyn had pressed into her arms. As Evelyn strode toward the cockpit, the other officers moved instinctively to secure the cabin, one standing firmly by the entrance, another checking passenger compliance with swift, practiced efficiency. The atmosphere had shifted in a heartbeat from casual luxury to disciplined order. Charles sat slumped in his seat, his complexion pale. His earlier arrogance had curdled into something sour and brittle. He muttered under his breath, trying to convince himself. "This doesn't make sense. She was just some mother. This can't be real." But no one paid him any attention anymore. The man who had commanded laughter and attention now drowned in irrelevance. His voice a faint echo against the rising tide of order Evelyn brought with her. Captain Reed's face was grim inside the cockpit, and the glow of instruments cast sharp shadows across his features. He wasted no time on pleasantries. "Major Carter, intelligence confirms a hostile aircraft approaching the national airspace. Communications are compromised, and ground command has requested that we hold the position until clearance. We need your strategic direction." Evelyn leaned over the radar display, her eyes scanning the blips of approaching aircraft. Her mind sharpened instantly, slipping into the gears of training and instinct honed over years of high-stakes decisions. She could already see the patterns forming, the possible outcomes branching like a tree of fire in her mind. "We don't have time to wait for clearance," she said firmly. "If those aircraft cross into our corridor, civilian lives are at risk, not just here but across the coast." She traced her finger across the radar, pointing out a maneuver to reposition them while maintaining tactical advantage. Reed hesitated, torn between protocol and survival. Evelyn met his eyes. "You brought me here because you need more than protocol. You need someone who knows how to win this. Trust me." Her words landed with the force of conviction sharpened by experience. Reed exhaled, nodded once, and relayed her instructions to his co-pilot. The aircraft adjusted course with a subtle shudder, a shift that passengers might overlook, but one that carried the weight of 1,000 lives. Back in the cabin, whispers spread like wildfire. The quiet mother was a major, a strategist, a soldier who had been hidden in plain sight. For the first time since boarding, the passengers looked not at Charles, but at Evelyn's daughter, seeing not a nuisance, but the child of someone extraordinary. The girl sat quietly, clutching her bear, her wide eyes fixed on the door through which her mother had disappeared. She didn't cry, she didn't call out. Somewhere in her small heart, she understood that her mother was unlike the others. Charles leaned back in his seat, sweat beading at his temple, the weight of humiliation pressing down harder than the pressurized cabin air. The laughter he had once wielded now felt like a curse echoing back at him. He muttered again, more desperately, "This isn't real. It can't be." But the truth had already shattered his illusions. Minutes stretched into eternities. The cabin was no longer filled with idle chatter, but with anxious silence, broken only by the occasional barked instruction from one of the officers securing the aisles. Every soul on board knew now that they were not just passengers on a routine flight. They witnessed something extraordinary, a moment that would etch itself into memory with a gravity none of them could yet comprehend. In the cockpit, Evelyn stood firm, her presence as steady as the horizon. She issued orders with precision, her mind weaving strategy from chaos, her voice carrying the assurance of someone who had been forged in fire long before this day. And yet, as the aircraft adjusted course under her command, a darker truth pressed at the edges of her mind. This was no accident, no random emergency. Someone had known she would be here. Someone had engineered this moment. Her jaw tightened, her gaze narrowing at the approaching blips on the radar. She had been called back into the war she thought she had left behind. And this time, the battlefield was not just skies and steel, but the fragile lives of everyone who sat behind her, trusting her with everything they had. The emergency call had changed everything. The quiet mother was gone. In her place stood Major Evelyn Carter, and the fight had only just begun. The cockpit was quiet except for the steady hum of engines and the soft beeping of the radar. Evelyn stood with her arms braced against the console, her eyes locked on the screen where glowing dots crept closer with every second. Each pulse was a reminder that the fragile safety bubble surrounding the aircraft could shatter at any moment. Captain Reed glanced at her, his jaw tight. "We're trained for emergencies, Major, but not this." His words were measured, laced with tension. "You're the only one here who has fought wars in the sky." Evelyn did not respond immediately. Her mind moved through possibilities, analyzing distance, velocity, and formation. Hostile aircraft never moved in such a pattern without intent. She inhaled slowly, then spoke with sharp clarity. "Those are intercept patterns. They're testing our airspace, pushing for a reaction. If we wait too long, they'll be on top of us, and then we'll have no choice." The co-pilot shifted uneasily in his seat. But why this flight? Why us? That was the question Evelyn had been circling since she heard the emergency call. Out of every commercial plane in the sky, why this one? Her gut whispered the same truth when things looked too coincidental. This wasn't a chance. Someone wanted her here. Someone had set the stage. She pushed the thought aside. Focus. First, save the passengers, then uncover the plot. She leaned over Reed's shoulder and pointed at the controls. "We'll climb 500 feet and adjust the bearing by 15 degrees east. That should throw them off balance, at least for now." Reed hesitated, then nodded. "Adjusting course." The plane tilted subtly, engines humming louder as they ascended into a new flight path. Back in the cabin, the shift was noticed. Nervous eyes darted to the windows as clouds drifted at new angles. The officers Evelyn had summoned moved with disciplined efficiency, securing passengers and calming those who began to panic. Colonel Grant walked the aisle like a sentinel, his voice steady and reassuring. "Stay calm. The situation is under control." He caught Charles trying to sneak a glance at his phone and snapped sharply, "Devices away, now." Charles flinched, fumbling to shove it back into his bag, the arrogance stripped from him altogether. At the front of the cabin, Evelyn's daughter sat curled in her seat, her bear hugged tightly against her chest. Her wide eyes searched every corner, waiting for her mother to return. Though frightened, she remained silent, perhaps sensing that strength was expected of her now. When Evelyn returned to the cabin, the air seemed to shift again. Passengers leaned forward instinctively, searching her face for answers, for hope. She scanned the room, reading every detail the way a soldier does. The fear was thick but contained. The officers were doing their part, order held, for now. Her daughter reached for her, and Evelyn crouched to kiss her forehead. "I'm here, sweetheart. Just stay brave for me a little longer." Then she rose and addressed the cabin. "Listen carefully. We are in controlled airspace, but hostiles are testing our perimeter. The captain and I are adjusting course, but we need full cooperation. No one moves without clearance from me or Colonel Grant. Do you understand?" A chorus of nods and murmurs answered. No one dared question her authority now. But even as she spoke, a prickling sensation crawled across her neck. She scanned the cabin again, slower this time. Something was wrong. Most passengers sat stiff with fear, clinging to family or gripping armrests. But one man in the middle row sat too calmly, his gaze fixed not on her, not on the windows, but on the overhead compartments. Her instincts sharpened. Every nerve screamed at her. She approached slowly, each step deliberate. The man noticed and shifted slightly, forcing a smile that did not touch his eyes. "Sir," Evelyn said evenly, "is there something in the compartment you need?" He shook his head too quickly. No, just nervous flyer, that's all." But Evelyn saw the tremor in his hand, the way his jacket bulged unnaturally at the side. Her years of training told her what her mind already suspected. She straightened, her voice cutting like steel. "Colonel Grant, check the passenger, now." The cabin froze as Grant moved swiftly down the aisle, two other officers flanking him. The man rose abruptly, panic flashing in his eyes. "Please don't touch me, I have rights." His outburst drew gasps, but Grant's arm locked around him before he could reach into his jacket, pinning him against the seat. The officers wrestled the man down, his protests turning to desperate shouts. From his jacket spilled not just papers or personal belongings, but a sleek black device, half concealed by cloth. Evelyn's stomach dropped at the sight. A signal disruptor. High grade, the kind used to interfere with aircraft communication. Passengers cried out in fear, some covering their children's eyes, others clutching one another. Evelyn snatched the device and studied it quickly. Custom built, not amateur work. Whoever planted this wasn't just trying to disrupt the flight. They wanted to sever communication entirely, isolate the aircraft like prey in the sky. She turned on the restrained man, her voice a low growl. "Who sent you?" But he only sneered, blood trickling from his lip where he had bitten down. "You'll never stop it. None of you will." His words sent a chill through the cabin, deeper than the fear already there. "Take him to the rear. Secure him," Evelyn ordered. The officers dragged him away, his defiance echoing behind him until the cabin door slammed shut. She stood in the aisle, device in hand, her mind racing. This wasn't random. They had come prepared, waiting for her. The hostile aircraft outside were only one part of the plan. This saboteur was another, which meant there were more layers yet to be revealed. Her daughter's voice broke the silence, small but steady. "Mommy, are we going to be okay?" Evelyn turned, her features softening as she crouched again. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be okay, I promise." She tucked the bear tighter into her daughter's arms, then rose again, her face hardened. She marched back to the cockpit, tossing the disruptor onto the console. Reed's eyes widened as he recognized the danger they had narrowly avoided. We never would have seen it, he admitted, shaking his head. That's the point, Evelyn replied grimly. Someone wants this plane blind and vulnerable. We're not dealing with coincidence, Captain. We're in the middle of a coordinated operation. Reed swallowed hard. And you think you were the target. Evelyn's gaze lingered on the dark horizon ahead, where hostile aircraft still circled like wolves. I know I am. She studied the radar again, heart pounding as she calculated distances and timings. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about unraveling the trap that had been set around her, a trap that now endangered every innocent life on board. Shadows loomed on the sky's edge, with them questions that grew darker with every breath. Who had orchestrated this? How deep did the conspiracy run? How long will it be until the final layer of the plan is revealed? As the aircraft cut through the night, Evelyn knew only one thing with certainty. She could no longer run from the past she had tried to bury. The war had followed her here, into the skies, and it would not stop until it claimed her, or until she ended it first. The night sky stretched endlessly and darkly around the aircraft, broken only by the blinking navigation lights and the distant silhouettes of the hostile planes that still haunted the radar. Evelyn Carter stood in the cockpit, her posture rigid, her eyes locked on the shifting display. Every second dragged with the weight of consequence. One mistake could cost 200 lives. Captain Reed tried to steady his voice, but the strain was evident. Major, those hostiles are maintaining a tight formation. They are not retreating, but they are not closing in either. It is like they are waiting. Evelyn's instincts coiled at his words. Waiting was never random. Predators circled for a reason. She leaned closer to the radar, her eyes narrowing. No, they are not waiting. They are stalling and buying time for something else. The co-pilot swallowed, his hands tight on the controls. Something else? Like what? Evelyn's gaze hardened. Something we have not seen yet. Her words hung heavy in the cockpit, an unspoken truth pressing down on them. She had spent her career hunting enemies who never revealed their full hand at once. This was the same pattern, a visible threat above and something hidden beneath. She stepped back into the cabin, her presence instantly drawing every eye. Passengers sat rigid in their seats, whispering anxiously, clutching at children or armrests. The restrained saboteur was bound tightly at the rear, Colonel Grant standing watch with grim determination. Evelyn studied the faces around her, searching for anything unusual, any flicker of deception. Her eyes landed on Charles. He sat slouched in his seat, sweat on his brow, his phone abandoned in the pocket. When he caught her looking, he shook his head quickly. I did not do anything, I swear. Evelyn did not answer. She moved past him and approached Grant. The disruptor is not the only weapon here, she said quietly. There is more. There has to be. Grant nodded. I feel it too. This was planned too carefully to rely on just one pawn. Before Evelyn could respond, a sudden shudder rippled through the plane, the overhead bins rattling as turbulence rocked the cabin. Gasps erupted, and the stewardess stumbled, catching herself on a seat. The passengers clutched each other, eyes wide with fresh terror. Evelyn grabbed the nearest rail, steadying herself. There was no turbulence. She rushed back into the cockpit. Reed's hands flew across the controls, alarms blaring as the plane jolted again. We are losing stabilization on the left wing. Sensors are reporting interference, but I cannot pinpoint the source. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She turned sharply. Where is the external camera feed? The co-pilot switched it on. The monitor flickered, revealing the dark expanse outside. At first, there was nothing but clouds. Then, faint but undeniable, a glimmer of metal clung to the underside of the wing like a parasite. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Sabotage. Someone planted a device on the aircraft before we even took off. The captain's voice cracked. If that thing detonates. It won't, Evelyn cut in, her voice steady but edged with urgency. Not yet. If they wanted us gone, they would have triggered it already. They are waiting for the right moment. Reed looked at her desperately. Then what do we do? Evelyn's mind raced. We buy time, and we find a way to neutralize it. She turned back toward the cabin, where the passengers waited in tense silence. The weight of every gaze pressed down on her, but she did not flinch. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "There is a device attached to the aircraft. It has not been triggered yet, but we cannot assume it will stay that way. We need absolute calm and discipline. Colonel Grant and I will find a solution." The whispers swelled, fear threatening to spiral, but Evelyn's commanding presence anchored them. Her words carried the gravity of survival. For a moment, silence returned. Her daughter's small voice rose from the front. "Mommy, will you stop the bad people?" Evelyn's chest tightened, but she forced herself to nod. "Yes, sweetheart, I will." She turned to Grant. "We need to know who else is working against us. The man in the back was only a decoy." Grant's eyes swept the cabin, then we smoked them out. They moved row by row, scanning faces, asking sharp questions. Most passengers trembled, offering nothing but fear. But as they reached the rear, a woman clutched her bag tightly, refusing to let go. "Open it," Evelyn ordered. The woman shook her head violently. "Number, it is mine." Grant stepped forward, ripping the bag from her grasp. Inside, nestled beneath clothing, was a second device, smaller, more insidious. Not a disruptor, but a transmitter. Evelyn's stomach turned. "They are broadcasting our exact position. That is why the hostiles are circling. They are tracking us like wolves around prey." The woman lunged for the bag, screaming, but Grant pinned her down as passengers cried out in shock. Evelyn snatched the transmitter and crushed it against the rail, sparks flying as it shattered. Immediately, the radar shifted. The hostile planes broke formation, scattering as if momentarily blinded. Reed's voice came over the intercom. "Major Carter, the hostiles are losing synchronization. Whatever you did, it worked." But Evelyn did not celebrate. Her eyes remained on the bound woman, who glared up at her with venomous defiance. The exact words echoed from her lips as the man before her had spoken. "You cannot stop it. None of you can." Evelyn's fists clenched. She leaned close, her voice a whisper only the traitor could hear. "Watch me." She turned and strode back to the cockpit. The radar showed the enemy regrouping, adjusting. They had been slowed, but not stopped. The device on the wing still clung like a ticking secret, waiting to reveal its purpose. Evelyn gripped the console, her reflection staring back at her in the dark glass of the instruments. The enemy was unseen, but not unbeatable. They had infiltrated her flight, targeted her presence, and spread fear among innocents. But she had faced worse before. She would not falter now. As the engines roared against the night, Evelyn knew the real battle was only beginning. The unseen enemy had made their move, but she would answer with fire. And this time, she would not only protect her daughter and the passengers. She would drag the truth from the shadows and expose whoever dared to follow her into the skies. The hum of the engines pressed against Evelyn's ears as she leaned over the cockpit console, her eyes fixed on the flickering external camera feed. The metallic object clung to the underside of the left wing, its shadowed form catching faint glimmers of light. It was compact, sleek, and deliberately fastened, not the work of amateurs. The sight chilled her more than the circling hostile aircraft, because this was not a threat that could be evaded with maneuvering. This was a blade pressed against the jugular of every life on board. Captain Reed's hands were trembling as he adjusted the altitude controls. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "How do we disarm something strapped to the wing of a plane at 30,000 feet? Evelyn did not answer right away. Her mind sorted through possibilities, drawing from memory and training. Explosive devices were not all the same. Some were crude, triggered by a remote signal. Others were sophisticated, responding to changes in pressure, heat, or even tampering attempts. But whatever this one was, it was designed to remind her that she was still in the enemy's crosshairs. "We need eyes on it," she said at last, her tone steady. "That camera won't show me enough detail." Reed turned sharply to her. "You're not suggesting—" "Yes, I am," Evelyn cut in. "Someone has to get closer." The co-pilot blanched. "Outside? That's impossible." Evelyn's gaze hardened. "Impossible is a luxury we cannot afford." She returned to the cabin, where passengers whispered nervously under the dimmed lights. The restrained saboteurs glared at her from the rear, their silence almost louder than the fear surrounding them. Evelyn ignored them. She walked toward Grant, who stood guard near the galley. "There's a device on the wing," she told him bluntly. "We need to confirm what it is before we decide on the next move." Grant's jaw tightened. "You're not climbing out there alone." "We do not have time to argue." Evelyn's voice was low but edged with urgency. "If that device is pressure-triggered, one wrong descent could set it off. If it's remote-activated, the enemy waits for us to make a mistake." Grant held her gaze, then let me do it. She shook her head. "Number, this started because of me. I won't put anyone else in that position." A soft voice broke the tension. Her daughter stood in the aisle, clutching her stuffed bear. "Mommy, you always tell me not to go near the road because it's dangerous, but you're going to do something dangerous now." The cabin fell silent, every passenger's eyes shifting to the small girl whose words carried more weight than she understood. Evelyn crouched, her hands steady on her daughter's shoulders. "Sometimes, sweetheart, danger finds us even when we do everything right, but I promise I will come back." The girl nodded bravely, though her lip trembled. She pressed the bear into her mother's hands. "For luck." Evelyn tucked it gently back into her daughter's arms. "No, you keep it. I'll need you to be strong until I return." Then she rose, her decision sealed. Reed protested as she entered the cockpit again. "You're not authorized for this kind of maneuver. If something goes wrong, this plane explodes anyway," Evelyn snapped. "The only difference is whether we fought to stop it or waited to die." Her words silenced him. Within minutes, the crew had prepared the emergency harness and opened the small maintenance hatch that led to the service rail outside. The rush of icy air howled through the narrow opening, sending shivers down spines and gasps through the cabin. Passengers clutched at their seats, watching with wide eyes as Evelyn strapped herself into the harness. Colonel Grant stood at her side, checking the fastenings with soldierly precision. He met her gaze, his expression carved from stone. "You always were reckless," Evelyn smirked faintly, "and you continuously followed me anyway." With that, she lowered herself onto the narrow rail. The roar of wind slammed against her, whipping her hair and stealing her breath. The cold bit through her clothes instantly, but she pressed forward, crawling along the metal surface with deliberate precision. Each movement was a battle against the elements, her gloved hands gripping tightly as the vast void of night yawned beneath her. The device came into view. Up close, its design was even more sinister. A compact casing with subtle wiring and a faint green light pulsing like a heartbeat. Evelyn's chest tightened. This was no crude bomb. It was a military-grade charge, fitted with a remote receiver and a pressure-sensitive trigger. Whoever had planted it had intended for her to see it. Her voice crackled through the headset. "It's dual-triggered, remote and pressure. If we descend too fast, it detonates. If the signal reaches it, it detonates." Reed's strained voice came back. "Can you disarm it?" Evelyn steadied her breath, studying the wiring. "Possibly, but it's designed to punish mistakes. If I cut the wrong lead, we'll never see the sunrise." Her fingers worked carefully, peeling back the casing, tracing the lines of the circuits with surgical precision. The wind screamed around her, frost forming on the edges of her visor, but her focus was absolute. Behind her, passengers huddled at the windows, watching in horrified awe as the quiet mother who had endured insults and dismissals now clung to the outside of the plane like a warrior in the sky. Charles sat frozen, his arrogance long gone, his face pale as he whispered that this couldn't be real. Reed watched her feed inside the cockpit, his knuckles white on the controls. Every second stretched into eternity. Then, with a final breath, Evelyn pinched two wires together and severed them swiftly. The green light died. She exhaled, relief flooding her veins, but only for a heartbeat. A second light flickered suddenly beneath the casing. Red this time, faint but unmistakable. Her blood ran cold. It was a failsafe. Even disarmed, the device was designed to trigger a secondary mechanism. Her voice cut through the headset, steady despite the storm inside her. "The bomb is dead. But there's a backup, a transmitter. They know it failed." Reed's voice was hoarse, which means what? Evelyn said they will come for us now, pulling herself back along the rail, muscles burning against the unrelenting wind. This was never just about destruction. It was about drawing me out. She climbed back inside, drenched in sweat despite the cold, her face pale but her eyes blazing with determination. The cabin erupted in murmurs, passengers crying in relief, some even clapping, though the sound died quickly when they saw her expression. She looked at Grant, at Reed, at the officers standing guard. They are coming, faster, harder. That device was bait. Grant's voice was grim. Then it is time to stop playing defense. Evelyn nodded. She had been reacting too long, chasing shadows and waiting for the next move. But now she understood the truth. The unseen enemy wanted her in the open. They wanted her afraid. And the only way to protect her daughter, the passengers, and herself was to stop running. She clenched her fists, every nerve alight with resolve. No more hiding, no more silence. The enemy had followed her into the sky. Now she would drag them into the light. The night outside was no longer silent. Radar screens in the cockpit lit with movement as multiple blips approached from opposite directions. The enemy had not wasted a moment after realizing their device had failed. Evelyn watched the patterns, her mind assembling them into a picture of an encirclement. Whoever was behind this wanted the aircraft trapped. Every exit was blocked. Captain Reed swore under his breath. They are pushing us toward international airspace violations. If we go one way, we trigger a military response. If we go the other way, we fall straight into their hands. Evelyn's voice was calm. That was always their plan, trap us between choices that are all fatal. The cabin behind them stirred with unease as passengers felt the aircraft shift subtly. The turbulence of fear was stronger than the air currents outside. Children whimpered, men gripped their armrests, and Charles sat rigid in his seat, still pale from seeing Evelyn on the wing. He had mocked her once, laughing at the quiet mother, but now he avoided her eyes entirely, ashamed and terrified in equal measure. Colonel Grant leaned against the cockpit frame, scanning the radar feed. They will not wait for us to make a mistake, they will force one. Evelyn nodded. Then we need to be ahead of them. She looked at Reed. Can you hold altitude and keep speed steady for the next 10 minutes? He frowned. 10 minutes? What do you have in mind? Evelyn's gaze hardened. A signal. If they are closing in, they want confirmation that we are still flying. I can give them the opposite impression. Reed blinked. You mean a deception maneuver? Grant's mouth curved grimly. She means to make them believe we are already falling. The plan was daring, bordering on reckless, but there was no alternative. Evelyn directed the crew to manipulate transponder readings, feeding false descent data into the systems, while Reed dipped just enough to mimic a loss of altitude without endangering the aircraft. From the outside, to hostile eyes, it would appear the plane was crippled, sinking fast toward the ocean below. The passengers felt the shift. Murmurs rose, panic bubbling until Evelyn stepped back into the aisle. Her voice cut through the fear like a blade. Stay calm. The turbulence you feel is controlled. We are not falling. Do not spread panic. Trust me. Something in her tone silenced them. Even those who doubted her now clung to her words as a lifeline. Her daughter's eyes never left her, wide but filled with something more substantial than fear. Faith. Minutes crawled by, then the radar pinged again. Two of the blips peeled away, circling back in confusion, but the others pressed forward, faster now, closing the distance. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. They were not convinced. A sudden burst of static cut through the cockpit speakers, then a voice, cold and distorted, filled the air. You cannot hide from us forever, Evelyn Shaw. You think clever tricks will change your fate. You belong to us. Reed froze. They know your name. Evelyn's jaw clenched. They always did. The voice continued, calm but venomous. We have waited too long for you to run. Every path you take leads back to us. You can save yourself and your child if you surrender now. Refuse, and everyone here dies because of you. The passengers heard it through the cabin speakers. Fear surged through them, eyes turning toward Evelyn, as if she held the key to their survival. Some looked at her with desperation, others with accusation. Charles finally broke, standing in the aisle. Do you hear them? This is about you, about her. He pointed at Evelyn, his voice shaking. Why should we all die for your secrets? The cabin erupted in angry whispers, fear lashing out in every direction. Evelyn stood unmoving, her face carved with resolve. She stepped toward Charles slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "You think this is my fault," she said quietly. Her voice carried to every corner of the cabin. "Do you want me to surrender? Hand myself to the very people who planted bombs and sent killers among you? Do you think they will spare you once they have me?" Charles faltered, his mouth opening and closing. Evelyn's voice grew stronger. "They will kill you all because that is what they do. They use fear, they use division. And if we give in to it, we hand them victory without a fight." Her words struck the silence like thunder. Passengers lowered their eyes, ashamed, chastened. Even Charles backed down, sinking into his seat and muttering. The distorted voice returned. "Brave words, Evelyn. But bravery will not stop what is coming. Look outside." On the horizon, lights appeared, the silhouettes of hostile aircraft, closing in with predatory precision. Their formation was unmistakable, an attack run. Reed's knuckles whitened on the controls. "If they fire on us, we do not stand a chance." Evelyn turned to Grant. "Options?" Grant's eyes were grim. "We can fight, but our weapons are limited. Evading them at this altitude is nearly impossible." Then Evelyn saw it, a storm front brewing far ahead, its towering clouds lit by flashes of lightning. To any pilot, it was danger incarnate. To Evelyn, it was salvation. She pointed. "Take us into the storm." Reed stared at her. "That's suicide." "Not as suicidal as waiting here," she replied firmly. "In the storm, their formations will break. Their weapons will be useless. Our best chance is inside." Grant nodded once. "She is right." The decision was made. Reed gritted his teeth and angled the aircraft toward the churning black mass ahead. Passengers gasped as lightning forked across the horizon, illuminating the path like the gates of an underworld. The hostile planes pursued, confident, closing the gap. But as the aircraft plunged into the storm, chaos consumed the sky. Wind tore at the wings, lightning split the heavens, and rain hammered the fuselage like artillery fire. Inside the cabin, passengers screamed, clutching each other as the plane bucked and shuddered. But Evelyn moved down the aisle, her presence steady as a lighthouse. "Hold on, do not lose faith. This storm is our shield." Outside, enemy aircraft struggled against the violent currents. Their formations fractured, their precision lost. One broke away entirely, vanishing into the storm's maw. Another fired a missile, but the turbulent winds deflected its path, sending it spiraling harmlessly into the clouds. Evelyn gripped a seat for balance, eyes scanning the windows. Every crash of thunder was both a threat and a cover. Every flash of lightning painted the storm as both destroyer and protector. Reed's voice cut through the comms, strained but alive. "They're falling back. The storm is breaking them apart." Grant's reply was grim. "Not all. A few are still on us." Evelyn's mind raced. They would not retreat entirely. They would adapt, change tactics. Which meant the danger was not over. Then she felt it, a shift in pressure, a sensation she had learned long ago to recognize, a signal that something was wrong. She rushed back to the cockpit. The radar confirmed her dread. One hostile had broken low, sliding beneath the storm, circling like a predator in the shadows. It was waiting for them to emerge, where the clouds ended and the skies opened again. Evelyn's chest tightened. The storm had saved them, but it had also funneled them straight into an ambush. She turned to Grant. "They know where we will come out. They will strike the moment we leave cover." Grant met her eyes. "Then we do not leave. Not yet." But Reed shook his head. "We cannot stay in this storm forever. The turbulence will tear us apart." Evelyn looked out into the roaring night, at the lightning that lit the sky in violent brilliance. Her mind was already forming the next step, the next impossible choice. The enemy thought they had caged her, but storms were never cages. They were weapons for those brave enough to wield them. She whispered to herself, though the others could hear, "We will give them one if they want a war in the sky." The aircraft shuddered again, lightning flaring across the windows. The passengers huddled, terrified, while outside the storm raged in fury. And within that fury, Evelyn Shaw prepared to turn the hunters into prey. The storm swallowed everything in its path. Thunder rolled like an unending drumbeat, while lightning slashed the sky in jagged brilliance. The aircraft fought against the invisible fists of wind, every shudder making passengers clutch tighter to their seats. Evelyn stood in the cockpit doorway, her eyes fixed on the radar screen that showed the enemy's silhouette waiting beyond the storm. They were patient hunters. The hostile jet below would not risk entering the tempest fully. It circled like a shark, waiting for them to emerge battered and vulnerable. Reed kept the plane steady, though sweat glistened on his forehead as turbulence tore at the wings. "We cannot last long in this," he muttered, adjusting the controls with white knuckles. "The frame is built for pressure, but this is punishment." Evelyn's mind spun. They would be struck down instantly if they burst through the clouds now. If they stayed too long, the storm itself might kill them. Every second mattered. She felt the weight of every life aboard pressing against her spine. Grant leaned close, his voice pitched low. "We need to use the storm, not just hide in it. If they expect us to exit, we must come out on our terms, not theirs." Evelyn looked at the colonel, a spark of understanding flashing between them. "Deception again, but deeper," she nodded. "Then we give them something to chase." She directed Reed to adjust altitude, dipping hard through the turbulence until passengers cried out in terror. At the same time, Grant initiated a sequence on the secondary beacon, transmitting false coordinates that mirrored their descent. To enemy eyes, the aircraft would appear to be leaving the storm prematurely, dropping into clear air where it could be targeted. The trap was set. Minutes later, radar confirmed the hostile jet taking the bait, swinging wide and accelerating toward the false signal. Evelyn's breath caught as the blip drifted farther away. The hunter had taken the lure, but her relief was short-lived. Another ping appeared on the screen. A second jet, smaller, faster, hidden until now. It had been waiting in silence for the first to flush them out. Grant's eyes darkened. They always have another piece on the board. The second jet approached with surgical precision, weaving through the storm's edges. This one was not careless, not fooled by false trails. Evelyn's pulse quickened. They had anticipated her moves before and studied her patterns. Whoever commanded these skies knew her too well. Reed grunted as the plane jolted hard. "We are running out of time. If we take another hit from turbulence like that, I cannot promise the wings will hold." Evelyn closed her eyes for a heartbeat. Her daughter's face flashed in her mind, calm despite the chaos. That calm gave her strength. When she opened her eyes, they were steel. "Then we turn the storm into our weapon." Grant's brow lifted. "How?" Lightning ripped the horizon, illuminating the black walls of cloud that towered like titans around them. Evelyn pointed toward the densest cluster. "There, if we climb sharply into the core, we can ride the updrafts. To them, it will look like we are being thrown apart. If they follow, they will be ripped to pieces. If they do not, we escape unseen through another corridor." Reed stared at her, jaw tight. "You are asking me to fly into the heart of a lightning factory." "Yes," she said. He gave a short laugh, humorless and sharp. "Then let us hope the storm is kinder to us than to them." The maneuver was brutal. Reed pulled the aircraft upward at a near impossible angle, alarms blaring as pressure screamed against the frame. Passengers shrieked, gravity crushing them into their seats. Baggage tumbled from overhead compartments. Oxygen masks rattled loose, dangling like pale ghosts above terrified faces. Through it all, Evelyn walked the aisle, steadying those who could not breathe, lifting masks, and placing trembling hands back into seats. Her voice carried over the storm's roar. "Hold fast. Do not surrender to fear. The storm is not our enemy." Her certainty anchored them, if only barely. Outside, lightning cascaded around the wings, threads of blinding fire that seemed close enough to touch. The plane trembled violently, yet it climbed higher, riding the furious updrafts. Radar showed the pursuing jet hesitating. Then, to their grim satisfaction, it followed. Grant gritted his teeth. They took the bait. The hostile fighter tried to maintain formation, but the storm showed no mercy. Winds hurled it sideways, lightning flared close, and turbulence spun it into erratic spirals. Evelyn watched as the blip on the radar jerked, then vanished entirely. Reed exhaled, his face pale. Storm got them. For a moment, the cabin erupted with relief. But Evelyn's instincts held her rigid. She knew too well that victories this easy were never final. Grant confirmed it seconds later. The first jet is circling back. They know where we are headed. The predator who had chased the decoy now realized the ruse. It was returning fast, cutting across the skies to intercept them at the far edge of the storm. Reed cursed. That one will be fresh, not torn by this weather. If it catches us at the exit, we are finished. Evelyn's mind blazed, piecing together fragments of possibility. The storm had given them cover, but they needed more than deception to escape truly. They needed teeth. She turned to Grant. You said we had limited weapons. How limited? Grant's lips pressed into a line. A single prototype defense drone, compact but untested in combat. It was designed for interception, not offense. I never thought I would deploy it here. Evelyn's gaze sharpened. Deploy it now. Grant hesitated only a second before moving. He retrieved a locked case from the compartment, opening it to reveal a sleek device with folded wings, its metallic surface humming faintly as systems activated. He pressed a sequence, and the drone powered to life, its eyes glowing faint blue. Passengers watched in stunned silence as the small machine was released through a hatch, vanishing into the storm like a ghost. Reed adjusted the trajectory, pulling the aircraft toward the storm's edge. Radar showed the hostile jet closing, accelerating into a deadly strike pattern, but alongside their blip, another signal appeared, the drone rising to intercept. Through static, Grant guided it, his hand steady despite the stakes. The drone danced through the clouds with the agility the larger fighter could not match. For a brief moment, predator and prey blurred as they circled in a deadly ballet. The jet fired first, a missile streaking through the clouds. The drone veered sharply, then released a countermeasure that detonated midair, throwing sparks of fire into the storm. The explosion rattled the aircraft, drawing gasps from passengers. Evelyn never looked away. She whispered under her breath as though her will alone could steer the machine. The drone surged forward, ramming into the jet's underside. A burst of flame tore the clouds apart. The radar blip flickered, then disappeared. The cabin erupted in cheers, voices breaking from the prison of fear. For the first time, hope tasted real, but Evelyn did not join them. She watched the radar, eyes narrowing at the silence that followed. Victory had come too cleanly, too suddenly. She had played this game too long to believe it was over. And then the comms crackled again, the same cold voice from before. Impressive, Evelyn, but you know as well as I do that storms pass. When the skies clear, nothing will hide you. We will be waiting. The signal cut, leaving only static. Evelyn's daughter tugged at her sleeve, whispering, Mama, will they always chase us? Evelyn knelt, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. Her own voice was steady, though her heart ached. They will chase, but we will not stop fighting. Not while there is sky left to fly. Outside, the storm still raged, but its walls thinned ahead. The aircraft pushed toward light, toward open skies. Yet the words hung heavy in every heart. When the clouds broke, what awaited them would be more dangerous than anything they had yet faced. Evelyn rose, staring into the fading darkness. Her fight was for survival and the truth buried behind the relentless pursuit. And when that truth came to light, the entire world would feel the storm. The storm finally broke, peeling away in scattered wisps until the endless sky stretched before them. The sun bled into the horizon, painting gold across the bruised clouds, but the beauty felt hollow. Beneath its glow, tension remained thick, the silence in the cabin taut as stretched wire. Passengers clung to the fragile calm, their relief cautious, eyes darting as if expecting shadows to emerge from the light. Captain Reed adjusted the controls, his voice tight. We are clear of turbulence. Engines are steady, but fuel consumption has doubled. We cannot keep this pace forever. Grant folded his arms, eyes locked on the radar. Then we land soon, or we risk drifting with no power. The mention of landing stirred unease among the passengers. Landing meant exposure. Landing meant choosing where to fight. Evelyn stood near the cockpit, her profile carved sharp against the dim glow of instruments. She said nothing, yet her silence carried weight. Her daughter tugged gently at her hand. "Mama, is it over now?" Evelyn crouched, brushing her daughter's hair back from her face. "No, my love, but it will be. One day soon." The words were meant to soothe, but in her chest, Evelyn knew the truth. This was only the eye of the storm. An hour passed in strained quiet before the radar pulsed again. A faint signature flickered at the edge of range. It was too large for a fighter, too steady for a decoy. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. Reed leaned forward. "That is a carrier signal, a ship." Grant's jaw tightened. "They are extending their net." The hostile force had anticipated their path, stationing assets across the ocean like chess pieces. If they descended for landing, the ship would track them. If they veered away, fuel would drain to nothing. Every option was a trap. Evelyn studied the screen, her mind tracing patterns. They expected fear to drive her into mistakes. They wanted her cornered. Instead, she would turn their expectation into her blade. She turned to Reed. "Bring us lower, just enough for the carrier to see us." Reed froze. "You want to show them we are here?" "Yes. Let them believe they are tightening the noose." Passengers shifted nervously as the plane dipped, the ocean shimmering far below. Murmurs rippled through the cabin, fear threatening to ignite again. Charles, who had stayed silent since Evelyn's confrontation, finally found his voice. "This is madness. Why would you fly straight into their trap?" Evelyn faced him, her voice calm but unyielding. "Because the only way out is through." The aircraft descended slowly, radar pings growing stronger. Grant's eyes flicked between screens. "They are watching," Evelyn nodded. "Good, then we make them blind." Grant's lips curved in understanding. Electronic warfare. Hidden in the aircraft's systems were fragments of technology never meant for civilian skies. Scramblers, disruptors, tools of defense kept buried for moments like this. Grant activated them, threads of interference blooming across the spectrum. The aircraft became a ghost to the carrier below, flickering in and out of existence. But jamming had its cost. Lights flickered, comms buzzed with static, and navigation screens stuttered. Reed fought with the controls, muttering curses. "This is flying blind." Evelyn stood steady, one hand resting on the back of his chair. "Then, trust your instincts. Machines can fail. The sky will not." For several tense minutes, they ghosted along the edge of detection, their presence an apparition on enemy screens. Yet Evelyn knew the deception would not last. The enemy would adapt, and when they did, pursuit would return sharper than ever. The cabin remained restless. Some passengers prayed under their breath. Others whispered accusations about secrets that put them all in danger. Evelyn's daughter sat quietly, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. Then, without warning, the comms cleared. A voice sliced through the static, smooth and deliberate. "You are resourceful, Evelyn, but you are not unpredictable. Did you think you could outrun destiny?" The voice was new, yet familiar in its authority. It was not the distorted growl from before. This one was colder, more precise, carrying the weight of command. Evelyn's stomach clenched. She knew who it was. Grant recognized it too. His face darkened. Director Hallstrom. The name fell like lead. To Reed, to the passengers, it meant little. To Evelyn, it was the shadow behind every pursuit, the architect of the net tightening around them. Hallstrom's voice continued, calm as steel. "You are not protecting them, Evelyn. You are dooming them. Every life aboard that plane hangs by a thread of your stubbornness. Surrender, and they live. Resist, and their blood is on your hands." Passengers shifted, their fear rekindled. Charles muttered curses, glaring at Evelyn. Some nodded, silent agreement in their eyes. Evelyn spoke into the comm, her voice like fire. "You do not get to talk of protecting lives, Hallstrom. You send killers. You plant bombs. You build cages and call them choices. I will not be yours." There was silence, then soft laughter. You still believe you are free, but you carry something that binds you tighter than any chain. That child beside you, do you think we will not reach her too? The words struck like knives. Evelyn's daughter stiffened, clutching her mother's hand. Rage burned through Evelyn, fierce and uncontainable. She spat into the calm. Touch her, and I will burn your empire to the ground. Hallström's voice did not waver. Then you have chosen war. The signal cut, leaving the cabin in suffocating silence. Grant leaned heavily against the frame, his face grim. He knows too much. He is baiting you into reckless moves. Evelyn's gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the sun sank into fire. Reckless is believing he has already won. But she knew the truth. Hallström would not stop. He would chase them until sky and sea both gave way, unless she struck first. The passengers stirred again, voices rising. Some pleaded for her to surrender, to save them. Others clung to faith in her resolve. The divide cut the cabin in two, fragile unity splintering. Reed turned, his voice low. How long can you hold them together before they break? Evelyn's answer was steady. As long as it takes to end this. Night fell fast, stars blooming above the dark sea. The aircraft pressed forward, its shadow long against the waves. Yet even in the vastness of the sky, Evelyn felt the weight of pursuit looming close, unseen but inevitable. She stood by the window, her daughter asleep against her shoulder, and whispered words only the storm could hear. This ends soon, one way or another. Behind her, Colonel Grant watched in silence. He knew she was right. And he knew that when the final confrontation came, the world would learn the actual cost of Evelyn Shaw's defiance. The storm outside had finally subsided, leaving the city in a muted silver glow. Yet inside Adrian's office, the air was heavier than any thundercloud, thick with doubt, tension, and the stench of lies waiting to be unmasked. The once orderly stacks of papers on his desk now lay in disarray, scattered by his restless search for truth. He had replayed every word, glance, and conversation over the past weeks, trying to make sense of the betrayal closing in like a tightening noose. Clara sat stiffly across the polished wooden desk, her hands folded in her lap, her face pale yet determined. She had not spoken much since the revelations began trickling in, but her silence was not one of guilt. It was the silence of someone calculating and preparing to face a storm of accusations with a spine of steel. Adrian could see that in her eyes, the unyielding fire of someone who would not be broken. Still, the shadows of betrayal had a way of distorting even the most evident truths. Adrian leaned back in his chair, his voice low but sharp. "Do you realize what this means?" he asked, sliding a thin file across the desk toward her. Clara hesitated before opening it. Inside were photographs, grainy, hurriedly taken images of late-night meetings between figures she recognized too well. Among them was Vincent, his face partially hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but unmistakable. And beside him another figure, someone Clara had trusted implicitly until now. Her breath caught. Marcus. The name echoed in her mind like a gunshot. Marcus, the advisor who had stood by her side since the beginning, who had claimed to fight for her safety, who had sworn his loyalty. Seeing his face next to Vincent's was more painful than any wound she had endured. Betrayal was never just an act, it was a fracture of the soul, and this one cut deep. Adrian studied her expression carefully. "I needed to see your reaction," he said, "and now I know." Clara's voice trembled with restrained fury. "Marcus has been feeding them information. That is why they were waiting for us every step we took. That is why every move felt like walking into a trap." Adrian nodded grimly. The circle of trust was smaller than we imagined. The office door creaked open then, and Jonathan stepped in, his face pale, his jaw set. He carried a folder, his knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. His eyes darted to Clara, then Adrian, before landing on the photographs on the desk. "So it's true," he whispered. "Marcus has turned." Jonathan's voice cracked under the weight of disbelief. He had admired Marcus, perhaps even envied his closeness to Clara. To discover that the man had been working against them shattered something in him too, his fists clenched at his sides. "I should have seen it." Clara shook her head firmly. No, Jonathan, none of us could have. Marcus was too careful, too clever. But the cleverness of betrayal always left behind threads, Adrian mused. And now we have enough to unravel the web. The tension in the room thickened as Clara rose to her feet. Her calm demeanor was slipping, the fire within her rising. I want him found, she said. No, I want him confronted. He owes me answers. Adrian hesitated. Clara, we cannot walk into this unthinkingly. Marcus is dangerous now. Desperation makes traitors lethal. Clara's eyes burned with resolve. I do not care how dangerous he is. He lied to me, used me, and led us into traps. I will not be silent while he plots against us from the shadows. Jonathan stepped closer, his voice softer now, though laced with urgency. Clara, if you confront him, you must be prepared for the truth. What if he was never the man you thought he was? Clara's heart twisted. Jonathan's words echoed her deepest fear, that Marcus's loyalty had always been a facade, that everything she had believed about him was false. But she could not allow doubt to paralyze her now. Betrayal had to be faced head-on, or it would consume them all. Later that night, the trio crept through the abandoned warehouse district on the city's outskirts. The rain had left the ground slick, and their footsteps echoed through the cavernous silence. Adrian led the way, his sharp eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. Jonathan followed close behind, his hand never straying far from the concealed weapon. Clara walked between them, her presence a steady flame guiding their mission. Inside one of the warehouses, faint light flickered through the cracked windows. The air smelled of rust and oil, the remnants of a place long forgotten by industry, but now reborn as a nest for betrayal. They entered cautiously, their breaths shallow, the tension humming like a taut wire. And there he was. Standing at the far end of the room, Marcus partially turned his back, speaking in hushed tones to someone hidden in the shadows. But the silence was shattered when he turned and his eyes met Clara's. Clara stepped forward, her voice strong despite the trembling in her chest. Why, Marcus? Why betray everything we fought for? Marcus's expression was unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he laughed softly, bitterly. Betray? Clara, you never understood. I was never on your side. Jonathan lunged forward, fury blazing in his eyes, but Adrian caught his arm, holding him back. Let him speak. Marcus's voice grew colder. You think loyalty is free? That I would risk everything for nothing? Vincent offered me what you never could. Power, freedom, and a future where I was not just a pawn in your noble crusade. Clara's heart pounded, her fists clenched at her sides. And what about trust, Marcus? What about the bond we had? Marcus's gaze flickered, just for an instant, betraying something softer beneath the hardened exterior. But it vanished quickly, replaced by a sneer. Bonds are illusions. Trust is a weakness. And you, Clara, were naive enough to believe in it. Adrian's voice cut through the tension like steel. Enough. You made your choice, Marcus, and now you will face the consequences. The confrontation erupted into chaos then. Shadows moved, revealing Vincent's men hidden along the edges of the warehouse. A trap. Marcus had not come alone, and now they were surrounded. Clara's heart raced as she drew in a sharp breath, her resolve unshaken. The betrayal had revealed itself fully, and the battlefield was set. There was no room for hesitation now, no time for doubts. Trust was shattered, but determination remained unbroken. In the swirling chaos of betrayal and danger, Clara stood taller than ever, her eyes locked on Marcus. The man she had once trusted was now the enemy she would have to overcome. The shadows of betrayal had consumed the night, but within her burned a light too fierce to be extinguished. And as the first blow was struck, the war between loyalty and treachery began in earnest, with Clara at its very heart. The warehouse reverberated with chaos as the trap finally sprang into motion. The shadows Marcus and Vincent had kept hidden lunged forward, weapons glinting in the pale light, boots crunching on the damp concrete floor. Clara felt the world slow for a fraction of a second, her heart hammering in her chest, her vision narrowing to the traitor who stood across from her. Everything, the lies, the fear, the exhaustion, collapsed into this one moment. Betrayal had revealed its true face, and now there could be no turning back. Adrian was the first to move, pulling Clara behind the cover of a rusted steel crate as bullets tore through the air. Jonathan returned fire, his face twisted with fury, every shot aimed with the precision of a man fighting for survival and vengeance. Marcus had vanished into the throng of Vincent's men, his shadow slipping between crates and beams like a phantom. His voice carried through the din, cruel and mocking. "You should have stayed blind, Clara. Now you will watch everything you built turn to ash." Clara steadied her breathing, forcing her fear into focus. She glanced at Adrian, who was reloading swiftly, his movements calm despite the chaos. His eyes met hers briefly, and she found a silent vow in them. They would not lose tonight. The warehouse became a battleground. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off metal beams, and the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Jonathan's shouts rang out, rallying them forward, while Clara pressed her back against the crate, her hand tightening around the small knife she carried. It felt inadequate against the storm of violence, but it was not the blade that mattered, the resolve behind it. They pushed forward, step by step, carving a path through Vincent's men. Adrian's strategy was clear: split their forces, break their formation, and turn the trap against them. Clara followed close behind, her eyes scanning the shadows for Marcus. Every flash of movement teased her rage, every shadow whispered his name. He was the betrayal she had to confront, no matter the cost. As the gunfire subsided for a moment, Clara caught sight of Marcus across the warehouse. He stood on an elevated platform, his face illuminated by the dim flicker of a hanging light. Vincent was beside him, his expression smug, as though he had already claimed victory. Clara's blood boiled. Without hesitation, she broke cover, sprinting toward the stairwell that led to the platform. Adrian shouted her name, but she did not slow. Jonathan covered her with precise bursts of fire, giving her the needed opening. She ascended the stairs two at a time, her knife clutched tightly, her mind focused on the man who had destroyed her trust. Marcus saw her coming, his lips curled into a grin that made her stomach twist. So, the queen finally rises to confront her traitor. "Do you think your conviction will save you, Clara?" She stopped a few feet away, her chest heaving, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "No, Marcus, it will not save me, but it will destroy you." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Then Marcus lunged, a blade flashing in his hand. Clara parried the strike with raw instinct, the clang of steel echoing in the cavernous room. Their fight became a storm of blades and fury, each strike a clash of broken trust and searing rage. Below them, Adrian and Jonathan were locked in their own desperate struggle, holding back Vincent's forces as the warehouse descended further into chaos. But Clara and Marcus's battle drew every eye, a duel that embodied the war between loyalty and betrayal. Marcus fought with the ferocity of a man with nothing left to lose, each strike fueled by greed and bitterness. Clara fought with something more substantial: conviction, the unyielding strength of someone who refused to let betrayal define her. Every parry and counter was a declaration she would not break. At one point, Marcus's blade cut across her arm, the sting of pain burning hot. But Clara did not falter. Pain only sharpened her focus. She disarmed him with a surge of strength, sending his knife clattering to the floor. For a moment, Marcus froze, his eyes flashing with panic before he masked it with a sneer. "Go ahead," he hissed. "Finish it. Please prove that you are no better than I." Clara raised her knife, her hand trembling, her mind whirling with fury and doubt. Ending Marcus here would mean justice, but it would also mean carrying his shadow forever. She saw in his eyes the hollow void of a man consumed by his own betrayal, a void that had once been filled with loyalty and trust. Killing him would not erase that pain, it would only bind her to it. With a cry of defiance, Clara drove the blade into the wooden beam beside Marcus's head, the steel sinking deep into the timber. She leaned close, her voice a whisper of fire. "You are not worth my soul." Marcus's sneer faltered, replaced by confusion, then rage. But before he could move, Adrian appeared behind him, gun raised. "Marcus, you chose your side," Adrian said coldly. "And this is where it ends." The shot rang out, echoing through the warehouse. Marcus staggered, shock written across his face, before collapsing to the floor. Clara stood frozen, her chest heaving, her knife still embedded in the wood. Adrian lowered his weapon, his expression grim but resolute. The battle below was reaching its end as well. Jonathan had taken down the last of Vincent's men, his body bruised but unbroken. Seeing his forces crumble, Vincent tried to flee through the back entrance, but Jonathan intercepted him. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Jonathan's fury unleashed in every strike until Vincent lay defeated. His reign of manipulation shattered. Silence finally settled over the warehouse, broken only by the distant rain drip through the roof. Clara sank to her knees, exhaustion washing over her. The storm had passed, but the cost was heavy. She felt Adrian's hand on her shoulder, steady and grounding. "It is over," he said softly. Clara looked at Marcus's lifeless body, her heart heavy but strangely lighter than before. The betrayal had scarred her, but it had not broken her. She had faced the darkness and chosen her own light. Together they left the warehouse, the dawn breaking on the horizon as they stepped into the cool morning air. The world outside felt different, sharper, as though cleansed by the night's reckoning. Jonathan walked beside them, his eyes weary but burning with renewed purpose. As they moved forward, Clara knew this was not the end. Betrayal left wounds that time alone could not heal, and the shadows of the past would always linger. But she also knew that strength was not in never being betrayed, but in rising again despite it. The final reckoning had come, and though scars remained, Clara stood taller. She had lost trust, faced treachery, and battled shadows, but had not lost herself. And as the sun rose, painting the city in gold, Clara vowed silently that no betrayal would ever steal her resolve again. The future was uncertain, but she was no longer afraid. She had found the unshakable truth in the ashes of betrayal. Courage would always outshine the shadows.